Hi everyone, welcome back to Byte Marx. Joining us today is a very special guest. You've seen him on Vosh. Say hello to Richard.
Hi, so I go by Richard Hannay on Twitter. I am a military history third year. I am now finishing my degree really shortly.
Wh-
Basically, I have my last exam in May.
which degree is that
Um,
specifically?
so I'm getting a degree in military history from the University of Kent, and I've also done some modules in political philosophy and I think acting also. Not acting, stand-up comedy. I did a module in that too. Yeah, no,
That was
I'm not
unexpected.
as funny as I thought. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't as funny as I expected. I got a bad grade, but it was fun still.
It's that dry Brit. It's being a stand-up in Britain must be really hard when all the comics are like super dry, like sarcastic wit people.
I mean, I am not 100% sure. I never actually got to do a stand-up show because, well, the pandemic didn't really allow us to do much performance on stage, and since I like to feed off the audience, like doing my stand-up routine in front of a wall and a camera wasn't really
Oh yeah.
very good for my confidence, you know. It's hitting them with your jokes and getting no laughs from the wall. It's not exactly conducive to a cool show with a lot of improvisation.
Oh
You
yeah,
know.
of course. So you're a student of history. What exactly, in a short sentence, what would exactly would you say makes you so interested in learning about history?
Oh well, it's really a hard question to ask. When I lived back in Greece, I was certain that I would become a mechanic
Oh wow,
or an engineer, something like that. Something that had to do with like problem solving and like
machines.
designing machines. Yeah. So that was my main drive when I was back in Greece. But I found like a lot of complexity in how history is taught when I moved to the UK, and it really sparked an interest in me. And soon I found how much history like can illuminate like modern phenomena and also give you a lot of like understanding of the evolution of politics up to like the modern era. And although I was mainly interested in, battles and tanks and like airplanes, I was interested in those things.
Hmm.
The history of political movements uh, and insurrections and the effect of wars on on like society and how like we've progressed in after the 20th century. It soon came to like dominate my interests.
And would you describe yourself as much of a gamer?
Oh yeah, I actually play quite a lot of video games. I mean, I'm still fairly young. I'm 20 years old, so
You're younger
I
than I
still
am.
I ever what?
You're actually younger than I am. It's quite astounding.
Yeah, well, you never know who you'll end up talking to, right? The internet is a fascinating
Oh yeah,
place.
definitely. So
But yeah, I definitely consider myself to be a gamer. I've been playing since an early age, and I've been more and more interested in grand strategy, history games, and World War games as time goes on.
you were telling
So
me
I have a lot of opinions.
you were telling me before we started recording that you enjoy ganking noobs in War Thunder by playing obsolete tanks
Ah,
against.
yes,
It's quite
yes.
a
I
pro gamer
mean,
move.
my main I like to take up like late war tanks, and because in War Thunder, like if you're playing tanks, like the lineup will go by the highest battle rated tank, and then you'll end up in a match. And but you can take lower battle rated tanks with you, so I can bring a 7.0 battle rated tank, and I can bring along a 2.0 battle rated tank. And then what I do is I just get in the two battle rated tank, and I go into the battle, and I find something that is easy to kill, even at higher battle ratings, and I kill it, and I get like massive. Yeah, there's like it's a battle achievement called I think God mode, which is if you kill a tank that is 5 battle ratings higher than yours. And the way I got that, and I've gotten it plenty of times, is by using the interwar Soviet medium tank, the T-28, which has a short 76 millimeter gun and multiple turrets, and it's fairly quick, and I would just get in like cities. And one time, I think, actually more than one time, a few times, I managed to kill like the modern Leopard 1 tank,
whoa, that's
which
pretty
was
hectic.
a Cold War, it's a Cold War German tank, but it has fairly light armor, especially from the sides. And if you penetrate with a 76 millimeter, it will kill the tank. There's very little chance of it surviving.
Yeah,
I also managed to kill like an armored personnel carrier, a few armored personnel carriers with rockets on top of them. They are also very high battle rating because rockets are manually controlled. But a lower battle rating tank with a faster firing gun and like and a little bit of stealth can take those out like no problem.
It goes to show.
That's what I like to do in war.
It goes to show, even in more actual real life history, it's not necessarily the case that that obsolete equipment is just a death sentence. And there are plenty of examples of history where people with relatively old equipment can still do quite, look at, for example, the war in Afghanistan or in the Middle East. You have insurgent forces.
Oh, yes. Afghanistan is a great example.
Sometime, I heard, not recently, but I heard like there was like a stash of like Sturmgewehrs that had been uncovered somewhere, or MG40, like some old like World War II surplus. It's like, it turns out that if it shoots bullets, it can be used, and it's really up to your cleverness as a fighter to figure out how to best optimize your gear. And unfortunately, maybe like 40 years from now, 30 years from now, the future version of the Taliban or ISIS will be fighting Gundams with technology from today.
It's always military technology tends to trickle down to guerrilla and insurgent groups and even poorer countries. So often you'll see like tanks and like especially guns being used way past their expiration date. I mean, there have been some modern examples. Is that, for example, I think is it in Afghanistan that like T-34-85 tanks were found like fighting nowadays, where they were firing the guns from outside the turrets because it was too dangerous to be on the inside because it might blow up. I think there was also some modern examples where they found in Afghanistan FT-17 World War I tanks blocking roads.
Jeez.
I mean, when the British were first fighting in Afghanistan, not in the modern era.
Yeah, in the Anglo-Afghan wars.
They engaged with Afghan warriors fighting with muskets. And they would often end up in gunnery duels against.
You've got like some Afghan guys high up in a mountain shooting a Giselle at some British irregulars. Maybe they've got like a Martini Henry or an SMLE or something like that.
And that's the thing. When they killed those, they took their guns. And then the Soviets were fighting them with Martinis and the SMLE.
Even I still wager that maybe 20 years from now there'll still be some guy out there with a Martini Henry, shooting at a hover tank convoy or whatever. But let's not get too sidetracked. The actual topic for today is something that I think is very dear to both of our hearts, and that is representation in video games. Oh no, that's right, guys. We're talking about representation. But we're not talking just about representation generally. We're actually we're going to talk about representation in Call of Duty. In particular, Call of Duty 5. Battlefield 5. Whoops. I don't play a lot of those games. I sometimes get them confused. But yes, Battlefield 5. The one that followed on the relatively acclaimed Battlefield 1. So why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about Battlefield 5 and your experiences with it.
Yeah, so Battlefield 5 was a very, very much a very heavily hyped up game, and I was looking forward to playing it because Battlefield 1 was the first Battlefield game I actually got to enjoy because I really hoped I would get to play it. I got my first PC,
Ooh,
and
yeah.
I would actually be able to enjoy that game. I built the PC myself, and I was ready to do it. I played Battlefield 1, enjoyed it towards the end of its lifetime, and then Battlefield 5 was coming along. And because World War II is kind of my favorite war to look into, I was super excited to see how all the many facets of that war represented in a game. And I was supremely disappointed by the lack of content. With their new style of service, of like the live service format, was disappointing because in the end, I think it not only did it give a distorted view of the war and like having only the British and the Germans for the vast majority of the time, and then having just the Japanese and the Americans in a separate theater towards the end of its life. Like no Soviets, no French, no Canadians, no Greeks, Italians, Chinese. There was a very like a lack of allied and Axis armies that participated in the war. But that wasn't my main fascination with like the cultural aspects of the game. My main fascination came from like the anger that the trailers had sparked about how everybody was angry that there were women in the game. It's like, oh, a World War II is a it was a men's war supposedly, and the fact that there were women represented there, not only through like the trailer and the infamous amputee,
The prosthetic hand, yeah.
yeah, not only that, but also like through the Norwegian campaign story of like
The
of the
resistance.
heavy water plant being sabotaged, and for me, I was disappointed in those stories, not because of like the representation of women, because I care a lot about representation in games being good, because when representation is high quality and it reflects historical reality, there can be very strong arguments to persuade even the dude bro gamers that might be radicalized or or are bitter and hateful towards women. You can even sometimes convince them that hey, there could actually be excellent representations of women from World War II in video games. You understand what I'm getting at?
I totally do. So for the viewers at home, I think it's important to just take a step back for a second and talk about, more broadly speaking, the problem of representation. So my personal feeling is that representation isn't everything. You can have a very diverse media that still reflects a deeply unequal society. You can look you can look to, for example, South Africa's media industry. I would argue in some cases it's fairly diverse, but it doesn't do anything to portray or to reveal the deep inequalities that run through our society. Similarly, you can have representation that is good still, but still have a unrepresentative society. Like you can have lots of female characters in video games, but female gamers are still in a market minority. But something that is, of course, that you brought up that is also a problem is that when there is bad representation, it kind of is blown out of proportion. When people try to do something and the thing is bad, never mind if they try to do it because they are only thinking of representation, but when there are certain sort of bad representations, like which is a good one, Captain Marvel, right? When Captain Marvel came around, Brie Larson, the way that that infamous talk.
I never watched that movie, and I'm not looking. I mean, it's been poisoned beyond belief.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just like completely.
The fact that Brie Larson gave a very tame idea of, yeah, maybe we should have more diverse film critics and so on and so forth, created a pipeline of hate that was used by people like the Quartering, people like Geeks and Gamers. These sad.
Yes, people are still angry about Brie Larson.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like, chill. It's not that big a deal.
Yeah, she was used as fuel for a hate pipeline, essentially, that just and every other examples like Rose Tico in Star Wars and Rey as well. It seems like whenever there's even something that isn't just perfect, and even when it is good, right? Even when there is good representation, it feels like there is a media industry of terrible dude bros who are looking for any excuse to get angry at something because they feel as if their space is being intruded on. So, with that said, I think every person who is making a game, or especially a big game, should try to make their game fairly diverse. I don't really see any reason why a science fiction game has to be just white dudes in space. I really don't see any reason for that. Maybe you could make the claim about certain historical games, but even then, as we'll get into with regards to Battlefield, history is way more complicated than people give it credence for. As you brought up earlier, yes. World War II often gets ignored with the fact that it was really a massive global conflict that involved almost every single nation, at least in some respects, on Earth. I know South America, except for Brazil, was somewhat uninvolved in, but for the most part, almost every kind of person on the planet was represented in this war. And yet, despite this, we still have this idea that World War II was kind of just a bunch of white dudes shooting each other, And of the white dudes, it's mostly Americans, and then the Soviets, and also the Germans. And sometimes the British. You see what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of stereotyping that goes on with the dude bro community about like what the war was like. And I think that like when you set out to like make a World War game, you can have it be extremely representative without like provoking the ire of those people. Because I can think back, although this might be a bit unrelated, but I don't know if you remember when The Last of Us, the first Last of Us came out. I didn't see a lot of people getting angry at like Ellie, and like Ellie was her name,
yeah,
right? Ellie, yeah. No, I didn't see many people get angry when they got to play as Ellie. Like, I imagine there would be people yelling, "Oh, I'm playing it with like a 12-year-old girl. She would have died." No, we didn't see a lot of that because she was set up from the beginning as like even though a fictional character, she was set up as from the beginning as like a badass without like making it weird, if you know what I mean. But like, when I'm looking at a historical game, I can think of so many examples they could use of like badass women from World War II and stories that could have been said that are real that couldn't provoke the ire of those dude bro. You could find some of them that are completely historically illiterate. They would get angry because they just hate women. But I can think of a lot of normies that were angry, for example, specifically at the Norwegian story because they Googled it, right? And they found out that it was done by British commandos, that raid at the heavy water plant. And then they of course came to the conclusion that it was ham-fisted representation. And I don't want to give them that excuse. So I want to give them a story that is authentic to the war, and won't give them the opportunity to do like a Google search and tell me that I changed the story to add women, because that gives them ammunition. That tells them that women had no role in World War II, and you couldn't think of one to add. Yeah. So we made one up.
Yeah, one of the exactly that. One of the big problems of not necessarily lazy, but maybe ham-fisted representation is that you, even if you are trying to do a good thing, you in many ways ignore the real history. And I would argue it is kind of lazy, right? Because there are plenty. The example that comes to mind is there was a Soviet, tank ace who was a woman, a tank commander.
Savchenko.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
her story is very tragic. She lost her boyfriend or her husband in the fighting, and then out of grief.
Well, that's another one. That's not even Samushenko. You were thinking of another one. You were thinking of the fighting girlfriend.
Oh,
She
dang.
named her tank the fighting girlfriend, and she even jumped out to repair her in the field multiple times, and that's how she ended dying. She got hit by shrapnel while repairing her tank, like out in the field,
Yeah,
and she convinced the Soviet authorities to fight,
yeah.
actively.
Yeah, it's these examples where totally I agree. If you just want to be a edgy debate bro on the internet, right, and someone's talking about this, you could just go, well, actually, it was British commandos who did the raid, therefore, this is ahistorical nonsense. Well, yeah, sure, but women did play an active part in partisan resistance movements throughout the entirety of the war,
That too.
and
But see, that bothered me, for example, because I am from Greece, and I can think of like Greece and Yugoslavia, right? There was a lot of women that participated actively in fighting against the Nazis, and for example, like Greece had the Greek People's Liberation Army, ELAS, which was run by the communists in Greece. There were a lot of women that were active partisans that like took up arms against the invaders. For example, and even in non-combat roles, for example, my grandmother's sister, she's still alive. She's
Whoa.
95 almost, I think now.
That's hectic.
She helped she helped some British soldiers escape from Athens by boat after Greece was overrun, because she was working as a maid in a German. So my grandmother's sister helped some British soldiers escape through that port, through the mansion at the port of Piraeus. They were left there because of the but there are even my grandmother's sister example is a good one, but there were many other women that actively fought and shot at soldiers. There were many informants and spies. There was a lot of women in France also took up arms in the Free French Forces of the Interior. The French Forces of the Interior. There was a resistance movement. The Yugoslav resistance was, the partisans were by far the largest in Europe in terms of the representation of women in fighting. But for me, the most examples I could think of women in active combat during World War II were from the Soviets. And honestly, there were so many badass stories they could have said, they could have represented. So many. I mean, I thought immediately when they were talking about representation in Battlefield 5, I thought, well, they could have included the Night Witches. This outfit of women pilots in the Soviet Union that were fighting completely outdated training bombers, which they used to great effect at terrorizing German camps. They would fly at low speeds and turn off their engines and come completely silently during the night and bomb German camps. And they ended up acquiring this nickname of the Night Witches. I thought of that. I thought of the female anti-aircraft crews near Stalingrad that fought to the last woman in certain engagements. That it horrified the Germans that, we were fighting women. They never figured out that they weren't fighting men. But the Soviets had certain, even though they weren't born out in Soviet society at large, at least Soviet propaganda would equalize the women and men in the war effort.
So the question is, I think this is one that's kind of hanging over us, is why didn't they do that?
Mhm.
Obviously, if we can just sit here and spitball a couple of great examples, why didn't they do these? Why didn't
Yeah.
they look through history and come up with, these examples and use all of their resources, because they've got way more resources than like an indie developer, right? I think a part that has to be emphasized is that, sure, I don't want to force someone to make a video game, right? I don't want to do that. I don't want to force someone to make a game they don't want to make. But
Yes.
if you're a massive company with a lot of resources, you're not a small indie developer who wants to tell some, maybe your grandfather or great grandfather's story about, how they fought in World War II, then
Yeah.
you have the capacity to do the research to make these kinds of, single player campaigns or whatever, right? You have the ability to do that, but if you don't, then it's a choice, right? It's not. Far too often people assume, oh, it's just negligence. Oh, it's just them being lazy. But far too often, I think with these big corporations, it's actually a choice that they make. Why do you think that is? Or why do you think the representation was the way that it was?
Okay. My the main idea I had behind this, at first I just thought that, hey, most of the stories of like women actively fighting in World War II come from the Soviet Union, and the best examples that one could use in a single player campaign in a World War II game specifically come from Soviet Union, from snipers to pilots to anti-aircraft gunners to tank women.
Yeah.
All those, yeah, all those come from the Soviet Union, and in the end, the whole live service model idea, I think they had a a plan to add the Soviet Union later, and they didn't want to have an expansive single player campaign. So I thought that they might have they wanted to add representation, but they couldn't do it they couldn't think of or find good examples that they could write for, like in a World War in like the campaign for like early World War II. So they just kind of made up one,
Mm-hmm.
and especially in the trailer, just makes no sense to me. But hey, I mean, what can you do? I thought that was more of like a concept, like a show off of like the engine and the visuals more than anything else, and the destruction. It looked to me much more like a tech demo than anything else. It didn't feel like a game trailer. You see what I mean?
Yep.
But specifically when it came to representation in like later, they could have they never added the Soviet Union in the game, and I thought initially that maybe they would have added the Soviets later and would have had more representation of women, like in Battlefield 1 when they added the Russians, there were female snipers. So I thought, hey, maybe they were gonna add it later, but then I saw the whole backlash, and it was in general towards women fighting in war, women fighting in World War II, the man's war.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, specifically because they also chose to remove the woman with a prosthetic arm, I guess they were to an extent intimidated, and because sales of Battlefield 5 were low and the live service model just never worked out very well, they ended up scrapping a large portion of the game that was intended to go out there, because there was also concept art of Soviet fighting. There was even helmets data mined of Soviet soldiers. There was a teaser, for Christ's sake, a teaser from Battlefield 1 that had a modern Mosin, a 1940s Mosin carbine. So they had plans to add the Soviet Union, but they never came around to it. And I guess there might have been some gutting of the single player campaign. So because I think they wanted to add representation in some way, they ended up making it up and just making the whole thing worse. And they sparked this whole controversy.
Yeah.
in an era where like representation of women in games was always going to be controversial, they just they made poor choices, if you know what I mean. I don't think it was for a lack of will to make good representation. I think there was just like, in a sense, they said, okay, what's the harm in making our own stories? Well, you didn't exactly make your own stories. You kind of ripped off a story,
Yeah,
which was gonna cause controversy.
we have an episode on this channel where we talk about the history of video game crashes, and in that episode, uh, I talk about the development of the live, oh, at least some of the trends towards the live service model. I think you're totally right in some respects, because I think the live service model is cancerous, right? It is the it is a tumor on the game industry in the sense that it will just take and take and take, and it gives and it well, it just causes more and more harm. Live service games don't work. Really, they don't. The way that the model has been developed is only to ever cause gamer dissatisfaction, right? It doesn't matter if you're a leftist or it doesn't matter if you're a reactionary. No one really likes live service games just because they are designed to do one thing and one thing only: milk,
Make money.
yeah, milk money out of the consumers. And it's not a surprise that live service games are designed by deliberate consensus to be experiences that feel hollow, because you're meant to keep paying for that experience. And going with the live service model for a Battlefield game probably wasn't the best idea, because even though let's be real, most people will play this game for the multiplayer. Not too many people will keep replaying the single player. They might play the campaign, right? It's kind of expected that there will be a campaign. When there isn't, people will notice. But I think they might have made a calculation that, oh yeah, no one's going to give the single player campaign too much focus, so we can't afford to be a little bit more lax. And then they ended up having this sort of firestorm. Something else that is in the back of my mind is, to what extent do you think a company like DICE/EA are beholden to their worst fans? Because as we know, right, even though there has been a lot of strides in making gaming more accessible to people, gaming is still kind of, especially FPS gaming, is still kind of dominated by, for the most part, a bunch of white dudes. Not necessarily always, but they are certainly one of the most vocal segments of it. And to what extent do you think EA were galvanized by the backlash that they received to cut out that Soviet Union content that you were discussing earlier?
I don't know if they were galvanized by the community to cut the Soviet Union content in general, because Soviet content wasn't just going to be about women. What I'm guessing is they were going to add some like major fighting. Although, like, their whole theme for Battlefield 5 was the unheard stories of World War II. They were gonna add some perspectives that haven't been said before. But what I found like interesting is that, yeah, they were obviously affected in their representation towards the later portions of the game, because, well, it's evident they removed the prosthetic armed woman. Why did that happen? The only reason that happened was because of the backlash. I can't think of any other reason why they would remove just like some cosmetic item from the game. It just caused controversy, and that's the thing. Because let's remember, when was Battlefield 5 released? 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still towards the tail end of the whole like of like the whole like women in video games bad.
Oh, the Gamergate thing. That's
the Gamergate. Yeah, so it is towards the tail end of Gamergate, and people are still like causing massive boycotts and like hate mobs towards games that add women. So when you're adding representation in such a hostile setting, you better make sure it's good. Otherwise, your own like dude bro consumer base will shun you for it. And of course, it's not that they care about good representation, but at the very least, if your representation is good, you can use it as a a battering ram against the accusations of laziness and ham-fisted.
Yeah, because that's the one they always bandy out. Oh, Rey is lazy, because she's a Mary Sue or whatever. Despite the fact that it's a Star Wars movie, the protagonists are like Luke Skywalker is as powerful. Oh, I don't want to get into it. But no,
I mean, you know what I thought about? I was thinking about about Lyudmila Pavlyuchenko. She was a Soviet sniper, and I think she's one of the top 10 Soviet snipers of the war, killing 309
Jeez,
Germans.
That's hectic.
And she ended up in, I think, 26 sniper duels, which she won every single one.
Damn.
So I was thinking, can you imagine if they represented Pavlyuchenko, just sitting in a tree and waiting out her target, or fighting in the Battle of Sevastopol?
Oh yeah,
I cannot imagine a gamer bro saying, "Oh well, this lazy representation that we just ham-fisted. This person never existed." They can't say that because she's real, and she's a badass. So I really couldn't think of I thought that, hey, you missed an opportunity here.
Yeah, oftentimes when, one of the important things about representation, why representation does matter, is oftentimes if you have an opportunity to do some representation for a group that typically isn't included, you can reach people who would otherwise never engage with that material, right? If you have a compelling character who deviates from the expectations of the norm for these gamer bros, and you can make them a good character in a way that highlights the fact that they are underrepresented, that they have been ignored from history, and no, it was wrong to ignore these people from history, so on and so forth. You can start to challenge people's ideas about the past and also about the present, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why diversity is important and representation is important, because otherwise it's very easy for people to kind of fall into a media sort of blindness, with regards to with these certain topics. But it does need to be done correctly. And I think that opens up a very interesting question, because I'm sure that, someone might have the idea that, okay, well, we're quibbling here about historical accuracy when Battlefield kind of as a whole, as a rule, tends to play a little bit fast and loose. Like, for example, Battlefield 1 had the Hellrifle in it, even though that gun was never reputed to even exist. They've only got some prototype photos or whatever. So it's a lot of, semi-automatic, automatic weapons were in Battlefield 1, even though they were by far and away the minority of weapons. I think it's important to differentiate between historical accuracy and historical authenticity.
Yes.
Because, no one wants to play an accurate Battlefield 1 game, because you will spawn...
waiting in a trench for 8 hours, and then getting bombarded for another 8.
And then if you manage to survive, some officer tells you to, go over the top, and you instantly just get gunned down, and then you have to wait another 8 hours. Yeah. No one wants to play a game like that. So obviously we have to... Well, maybe some people do, because the Verdun game is a thing, but...
Hey, I played the Verdun game, please. How dare you?
Okay, yeah, the Verdun game is actually pretty fun. But even Verdun is not necessarily a very... Because you can't make... Yeah, you can't make warfare accurate, because it sucks, right? War is a terrible thing.
Exactly.
You have to do something to make it entertaining, and that's kind of the magic of video games. But that being said, accuracy is not necessarily the question, because these nerds aren't quibbling about accuracy. What they're actually quibbling about is authenticity. They have this preconception about what World War II looked like, about what the weapons were, about what the combatants were, about what the struggles were ideologically. And if it doesn't match that idea in their head, that's when they get angry. Because they're not going to get angry, many of them, I guarantee you, if a wrong model of shotgun or, wrong model of sniper rifle or scope is in the game. They're not going to get mad about that. Or if it reloads in a way that is not, true. They're going to get mad if they see, oh, wait, that's a lady. I don't in my mind, women weren't fighting in World War II. Or it's like, oh yeah, there's a person of color. This was primarily a war fought by white people. So even though like one third of the Axis is Japanese, and they were fighting in Asia, against many other Asian countries and people. So it's like it's the challenge of making something have that authenticity that challenges someone's preconceived bias about how World War II actually was.
I mean, yeah, it's good to because yeah, people quibble about authenticity, and of course, I mean, I care about authenticity. I cared about authenticity a lot when Battlefield 5 came out, and the problem is that a lot of people just don't have a good idea of what World War II is like. So you get when you have this opportunity to have good representation. Uh, what I mean by that is like this good representation can serve like as education. It can educate those people that like have this preconceived idea of what World War II is like. And I mean, can you imagine if they had a banner like "This is a true story," and then having a good like a nice representation of like a true representation of like women in certain front line roles. I mean, like I mean, I keep bringing up examples from the Soviet Union, but like there was a nurse. Yeah, there was a nurse that I think during the Battle of Stalingrad earned like the hero of the Soviet Union award by helping like hundreds of soldiers like in the front lines, like and retrieving them, and it's just like when you have the opportunity to have like good representation, like when you have this game, like bad representation can cause a lot of damage. So like because people like want authenticity, give them authenticity, give them an authentic story that'll teach them something, and that they won't be able to complain about, and you might even change some minds, because like gamers like care about what is cool and badass. I mean, I certainly did, and I looked forward to like a Battlefield 5 like giving me those unseen like untold stories from World War II. I was excited to see Norway included. Like the Battle of Norway is like something that very few people know about. But like in the end, like Battlefield was a hollow experience, not only because of the live service model, but because like they had such an excellent opportunity to include representation and like educate certain demographics that just hadn't come across like World War like certain angles of World War II. I think that the poor representation in Battlefield 5 primarily served to like reinforce their biases towards conflict.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. I think that one thing that has to be emphasized, and I think this is something that sometimes some lefties don't really pay attention to, is that people are products of their environment. Even terrible people are products of their environment. Oftentimes, a lot of these people who grow up believing these terrible things, maybe about World War II history in particular, are misinformed. That
Yeah.
they are misinformed.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Like something that I thought about when we were talking a bit earlier is that like we don't have to fight battles that like that like are pointless. Like we don't have to pick fights that aren't necessary. Like when we added the like a fake representation, like a made up kind of representation of this like Norwegian resistance girl, like disabling the heavy water plant in Norway. We ended up like picking fights about what is realistic, what is like historically accurate, and I mean we ended up like picking those fights. Why does historical accuracy matter? Like, and then there would be people saying, "Oh yeah, I don't care if I see like a gun from 1946." But I will care if I see a laser rifle. And people would say, "Oh, why is like adding a woman in a World War II game like adding a laser rifle?" And they would go back and say, "Oh, it's because like women didn't fight there." And that's the thing. Like we're picking fights that we didn't have to pick. So like if they had added like an actual like a story of an actual woman, if they had done like the research and found a good example, would have avoided this whole clusterfuck, and we might have actually educated a few people along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe for these people, this could have been their first exposure, to something like this, and maybe maybe you're right. It would have maybe had them question the narratives that they're traditionally told. I always like to point out that so many gamers have this completely warped view of like conflict in the Middle East, mostly because and I've said this on the show before, but mostly because they play video games that have a completely incorrect understanding of why people were fighting in the Middle East, right? These kinds of games often deliberately downplay or outright ignore the responsibility that the United States and various Western nations have in instigating, provoking, and ultimately exacerbating conflicts in the Middle East. Like, you will never hear a World War I game talk about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, right? That basically destroyed Arab nationalism following the successful dissolution, or defeat rather, of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. Why? Because, well, arguably, it's a very uncomfortable... Yeah, for a lot of gamers, they have this issue where I think they don't understand, like, the Middle East at all, and they actively resist learning about it simply because a lot of the video games that feature conflict in the Middle East, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, for example, don't portray it correctly. Even Battlefield 1, right? They're not going to talk about like the Sykes-Picot Agreement or really discuss in detail how it led to the destruction of the Middle East. Like, there's a campaign in Battlefield 1 where you are a woman, you're a Arab fighter battling against the Ottomans, and there probably might have been women in that resistance movement. That's totally fine. You help Lawrence, but at the end of that, what happens? Do they really mention that the British Empire and the French Empire would renege their promises and basically divide the Middle East up into their own personal fiefdoms and areas of control? No, not really. Do they discuss that consequence, that agreement, is one of the reasons why the Middle East is so messed up to this day? No, they don't. The same is true, for this kind of game, and I would argue that World War II is their best chance for doing this kind of thing, of educating people in a better way, because it's the one war that has the most clear morals. The Nazis and the Axis are the bad guys, way worse than the other guys in a lot of ways. But we're interested in history, so maybe we can point out that the nuances are a lot more complicated. The Bengal famine because of the British and certain actions taken by the United States as well. But the point is, you have a much simpler story to tell, and they take these opportunities and they still miss.
Yeah, it is truly disappointing when you think about it.
How would you, in a very briefly, because we are almost out of time here, but what's the one thing you would have liked to see? Because I don't think, even if the game was, had better representation, I still don't think it would have been a good game. I think the live service model would have killed it. But what would you have liked to see? It just one campaign. And how would that like to be done?
Listen, honestly, when the game came out, I had 1,000 different ideas of what I wanted to see, represented in like a Battlefield game about the lost times of or like the lost stories of World War II.
Yeah, the untold stories.
Yeah.
But Richard, if you could see one thing, just one story told in Battlefield 5, granted, I don't think it would have saved the game. I think the live service model would have killed it anyway. But if you could see one thing in Battlefield 5, what would it have been?
Like one thing in particular.
I know you have lots of ideas.
Yes.
But what is the one, like the most weird story, or maybe the one that stands out to you as the one that could have had like the most educational impact, something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, if we were talking just about like the untold stories of World War II, I mean, the ones that spring in mind, especially that maybe like an American audience would not have heard of, because for them the war is like Battle of Britain, Germany invades the Soviet Union, and then the Americans come in to save the day.
Pearl Harbor as well.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor, the Japanese, that's what the war is about to an American audience. But like, I would think about the Warsaw uprising in 1944. That's and like the struggle of like having the Soviets on the opposite coast, but just like too far, like too so close yet so far, like the feeling of abandonment. Like I thought that like a story about the Warsaw uprising would have been unbelievable if told correctly. And another thing, of course, that might be like the nationalist in me talking, but I would have found it very interesting if they added like the Italian ultimatum to Greece and like a few snippets of the Greco-Italian War. And they could have like because they included 2 maps in Greece in Crete.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Right?
Everyone knows about
like,
Market Garden. I think that's what it was called. No.
Yeah, Market Garden.
Yeah.
No, Market Garden is about Arnhem. It's about
whoops.
It's about Holland.
Whoops, my bad.
No, yeah, no worries. I mean, the German invasion is Operation Marita.
Yeah, there we go.
And
that's the one I was thinking about.
And I think Uranus. No, it's I don't remember what the name was for the invasion of Crete, because I know them as like the Battle of Crete, the Greco-Italian War, and the Battle for Greece. Those are the names I know them by, not by their German operation names. But yeah, I thought that they could have done like a little, like a small campaign story about like either Cretan civilians fighting back against the Germans in Crete, or they could have done like a little story about like a Greek soldier going off like on the back of like a donkey cart to go fight the Italians, you know, in the front, like with limited ammunition and just kind of like, yeah, it doesn't matter, it's our homes, we're gonna hold them back. And it could have served as an introduction for like the Italian army. The lack of the Italians, French, and Soviets was just egregious for that game. The live service kind of killed the depth that game could have had.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And not only that, there were many poor decisions that like I thought were egregious. Like, you know how they added a lot of skins towards the end of the game. You know, why not take the time, instead of adding skins, to add a few uniforms of different nations that fought in the war? And you could have just added a few voice lines, and that would have been enough. We didn't want 1,000 different paratroopers and then the flaming uniforms, okay? No one cared. Like, you could have added so many countries, like just like a few different uniforms and like a dozen voice lines and maybe like a few more maps, and that would have made it like 1,000 times better as a game. You know, can you imagine if like with Greece, like the expansion of like adding the Greek maps, if they had added like two rifles used by Greece, like the Mannlicher Schonauer and like the IPK Perkal machine gun, which was actually Greek made. If they added those two instead of like 12 experimental weapons that were never used, can you imagine if they added those two, like 2 Greek uniforms, like maybe a meme weapon, the 1874 Gras rifle.
Oh yeah,
which was a single black powder
yeah, I was
rifle.
about to say that was a French gun.
Yeah. Yes. If they added that and then added like as like the special soldiers, right? Because they did a special soldiers thing. Can you imagine if they added like a Greek Evzon soldier, like in like a badass traditional uniform? Like they could have done so much stuff. Like so many missed opportunities, one after the other. Like adding pointless game modes, creating like Firestorm, which was like supposed to be a battle royale that died within a week.
Yeah, it
like it was so disappointing.
For me, I think for me, I think one of the biggest tragedies of this modern era of game development is that we have companies who are increasingly short-sighted in their understanding of their markets and also of like what actually makes money. Because increasingly we've got disconnected executives who see the live service model as the financial future, because let's be real, even though it's a terrible model, it still makes money. And we've got this kind of like ballooning cost of developing video games, and every video game has to make more money than the previous one because of capitalism. right? Let's be real. The way that the video game system is the way that it is because shareholders need more returns on their investments. And if the games don't sell more and more and more, the shareholders get uppity. And, that's why you have this slash and burn approach where, like Anthem. Anthem is the best example of this. Anthem was dead on arrival. And
yes,
it reflected the fact they poured so much time, blood, sweat, and tears into making that game. And it was just completely boring, completely like forgettable. And it died. A game that was supposed to be playable for many, many years is now dead. I can't really think of a single live service game that's actually going to live up to its promise, even games that did relatively well, like Destiny 2 came out, and eventually it was superseded because the constant drive to keep making more and more money, because that's what this is, it's just simply making more and more money, is making games worse. And I'll tell you what, the video game industry did collapse a long time ago. Watch our episode on the video game collapse, Atari Shock, if you're interested. It collapsed. Thank you. It collapsed long ago because the video game companies, the executives, thought they had a license to print money, right? This time, we don't know necessarily if there will be a crash, but we do at least should expect that at some point or another, people are going to pull the plug on a lot of AAA companies. And the future of video gaming will look very different to what it looks now. And we hope that there are people making conscientious decisions to try to tell good stories, in the future. Yeah. And to recognize that video gaming should be for everyone. That you shouldn't, if you're a gamer, no matter where you're from, no matter what you look like or how you identify, there should be a game for you. And you should be able to partake in, the collective gaming experience. I want more people to play video games because more people play.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
I care about that. Oh my god! I mean, it's tiring to meet so many women that haven't ever touched a controller. It's disappointing. There's so much opportunity, so many cool stories to be made. So much. It's actually fun to play video games, I feel like huge parts of huge demographics miss out, and are subjected to cringe-worthy gendered marketing about games. Why we can why women don't like fucking wars? Is that it? No, it's not that. Obviously it's just poor poor economic incentives.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with the story, one of the reasons why video games are marketed to boys is because toy stores were selling gendered toys, and they decided that video game consoles and stuff like that were boys' toys. But before that time, there was actually a fairly split, accessibility in terms of computer programming and stuff like that. It was just a weird sort of byproduct of patriarchy. But for me, the way I think of it is like this: the best game that I could ever play, right now, is probably in the mind of someone who hasn't even thought that they could be a gamer, right? And the more people we have playing video games, the more those people will want to make games, and we only benefit.
And the richer.
Yeah,
exactly. There's nothing to lose from more representation in games. And that's the thing. I think the onus is on all of us to make the representation in games good, so that we can finally silence all those people that say it's ham-fisted and that we're only doing it for the forced representation, and we don't really care about those issues.
Yeah, we have to care about these issues, because if we don't, the right will use them against us, and will help no one, really. We'll just galvanize people to get angrier and angrier. But if we do make a fuss about good representation, if we do try to do good representation, we can only ever win from that kind of thing. And I think that's a good note to end it off on. Thank you, Richard, very much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. I feel like I have to have you on to talk about Hunt Showdown at some point, because that game is oozing with history. We could talk
I've
about
played that game myself.
we could talk about firearms and historical, weapons for quite a while, I'm sure. Please, if you please shout yourself out, if you'd like, anything
Yeah,
that you'd like to shout out.
sure. I mean, I think I should shout out my Twitter handle. I am it's Richard Hannay 17. So it's capital. It's RIS.
There'll be a link.
Sorry, I can't spell my own name. Yeah, just link it. Just link it. It's Richard Hannay 17.
I will
Follow me
link it.
there. I post about like politics and like history once in a while, and I'm also planning on maybe like launching either like a Twitch channel or like a YouTube channel where I might like rant about some topics that I care about. Yeah, also check the Golden Dawn talk I had with Vosh, because that's some important stuff right there.
Yeah, very briefly when I started talking to you, I was wondering, should I have the Golden Dawn talk with Richard? It's like, nah. We.
I've had it enough times now. 2 times is too many.
No, this was fun. We have to talk about Hunt Showdown. I've been playing the new, Age of Empires remake, Age of Empires 3, and I've got some opinions about that. Age of Empires 4 is coming. A lot of history to talk about in video games. Still no Age of Mythology, but I think that'll do it for today. You guys should check out Richard's stuff. If Richard does have a Twitch stream, I would like to, participate in that. I'm sure we could stream some interesting games and talk about that.
We could work something out, yeah.
And I would love to have you on in future. Hopefully you can become more of a semi-regular contributor to Byte Marx. That would be great. Everyone check out his stuff. You can find Byte Marx on YouTube. Please like, share, subscribe to this channel. We're also on Spotify. Shout at us on our Reddit. Follow us on Twitter. All the socials are in the description. Lastly, I should mention that Byte Marx is doing a Q&A because we recently hit 500 subscribers, and we will be doing a Q&A to celebrate. So the Curious Cat, where you can ask us questions, is in the description as well. So please don't hesitate to ask us a bunch of questions. We will answer as many as we can. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We hope you have a good evening. Good night.